This is a small town talk. I'll go into a couple of things today. One will be what's called the town report, which I will explain. And the other is sort of an instruction between city and town. Now, most of you say, I don't want to, that sounds like a lesson. And unfortunately, I did teach for like 3 decades. And I tend to revert to my school teaching days. So I'll do that because one of the things you've got to remember is some of the people who watch this show are from the city and they have no idea how towns work, and others don't. Make excuses for yourself now. Some of you are from the towns and you have no idea how the towns work. There's just a bunch of people get together every once in a while. So we'll talk a little bit about this and that. I like to start off where I'm most comfortable, and then maybe you'll be comfortable. One book I forgot the last time we met, and this one here is in the library, I'm quite sure. And I know it's difficult to read, but I'm showing it to you in a way because it's a paperback. And the title of it is The Leonard Family. So most cities and towns have, like in Easton, for example, it's the Ames. I don't know if you're from Easton. Some of you may be from Easton, and if you are, you know that about 25% of the town of Easton was owned by the Ames family. Early on, when these people came to these communities, with us it was the Leonards. With Easton, it was the Ames family. And when they came here, they came with something the community didn't have, manufacturing and business experience. And that I like to talk about these people because basically most people who talk about the history are history teachers or history type people thinking. I'm neither. I was a teacher, but of business. And so this is more fun for me to talk about the Leonard family and the Ames family, because those are two historically of the families in southeastern Mass that became well known even in the town of Boston in the early years. In the 1600s, these families were well known. Well, the Leonards, however, were manufacturing, and they didn't get involved in real estate particularly, whereas, and just to speak a little bit about a sister community, one town over, on your way to Stoughton, you've got to go through it if you drive, is the Ames family. And the Ames family got involved in real estate. But basically, I hear you out there now, you're telling the person sitting next to you what the Ames family did. They dealt in things like shovels, things, ironworks was the Leonard family, and the Ames family produced shovels and railroad ties and everything of a metal type of that type of a nature. But they also bought up at least 25% of the town, which means that once they got out of that business, quite honestly, not to be negative, but they got stuck with 25% of the town. And what do you do with it? Oh, I don't know. Let me think what you... Oh, yeah, you can pay taxes on it. That sounds like fun. So they had to, I don't mean to say unload it, they had to unload some of those. And in unloading it, part of it went to a school which your kids would do well to get into, thinking about it down life's road, Stonehill College. And Stonehill is an excellent college. You get your bang for your buck, if you will. And it's located on really both sides of 138 going up, if you're coming from Raynham up to Stoughton, let's say, on 138, the Ames family. And they contributed, you would say, well, would they 10 acres, 100 acres? Probably about 3,000 or 4,000 acres they contributed. And then also they were in the area of swamps and all this other. So the Ames family donated to the town of Easton all of those acres over the period of years, and that's where the original works were made famous by that particular family. Most of them now, the Ames family has moved out. There is a castle And last I heard, there was a branch of the Ames still living there. Most of the Ames family have moved to New Hampshire and Maine and Boston and things of that nature. So there's not many Ameses left in the town of Easton. We did have, for your own personal historical information, John Ames. Oliver Ames, of course, is the originator. And named school after him, right? Oliver Ames High School. But John Ames was the last rep of the Ames family, I believe, in this area anyway. And interestingly enough, he was a Republican representative, and he represented Easton, but also a part of Raynham and a part of Mansfield. And he, I believe, I could be rusty on this, but you won't turn me in if I'm wrong. I believe he took over, which I'm going to talk about here in a couple of minutes, Representative Walter O'Brien's district, which would have been all of Raynham, all of Easton, and part of, I believe, Mansfield, I think. So John Ames was there, and I'm going to tell you, I'm a Democrat. I'll admit that to you if you can keep a secret. But John Ames was one terrific guy, very nice young man, and he was the representative for a time or two, and then John moved out of town, and that's for another broadcast. We'll talk about that. Well, when we're getting into this now, I did make mention of the fact that I'm going to go into what's called the town reports. Now, for those of you that have been in town for 100 years, you know town reports. Those of you that might have just arrived, if you go up to the town hall and you look in the town clerk's office, and there's a little shelf in the front area there, and usually there's a book, small book, and I'm just showing you one of them now just to, I'll tear that off. I don't know my own strength sometimes. That was easy. Most people couldn't do that, so don't try that at home. This is the way the town reports look. This one here is a 1980. And again, I always push the library because I tell you that we have one of the top libraries, I believe, in Massachusetts. For its size, it's the best. And they have these town reports, and I haven't checked it recently, but it goes way, I mean way back, town reports. So they have that if you care to look at them. My own collection goes back into the 60s a little bit. I moved to Raynham in 1962, and that's when I started to collect these books. This one here is a 1980 annual town report. Now, don't take no dose now. You won't go to sleep on this. The annual town report will give you the information about the town of Raynham, and each town has one, of course. And it gives you the name of the officials. It gives you how long they have to serve in office before there's another election. It will give you a breakdown of the town departments on how much they spend and all. And quite honestly, it's a trivia which is worth looking at. They cost nothing. You can't beat the price. How much is it? Nothing. You get them for nothing. It will also give you election results in prior years. I just opened this up now, and I'm just going to give you one quick one for the 80s. Running for state representative is M. Earl Gaudette against Robert E. McCarthy, and these people run in several towns. In this case here, McCarthy became the representative. He had, in our town vote, he had 656 versus 217. So it gives you the different events. And by the way, don't think this is just out of this area and reps and things of that nature. This also includes local elections, and I'll talk about them in a minute, because they used to be more fun than they are now. Maybe they are still fun. Maybe I'm just getting old. Well, it could be a combination of the two. But anyway, in the annual town report, as I say, they're left out there. If you don't see one, you can ask the clerk if they've got some left over, like I think they only have probably 400 to 500 left over. They'll go down into the safe downstairs and bring up a batch of them, and you pick them up, and it's good trivia type reading, and no heavy lifting. And so now, by the way, I will mention this. In 1966, the town clerk's name was Lily. Isn't that a great first name, though? Lily? Lily B. Merrill. The name was not only colorful, she was. She was the quietest little lady in a town that sometimes their meetings were fiery. And she would sit there and she would keep the minutes and she'd be very quiet. And originally she would do the minutes and keep them all in her own house. And her own house, I'm going to give you geographics if you care to see it now. You go down Route 104, there's a fork in the road where there's a four-way stop sign at what we call the Stone Church. You take the left towards a place we call Johnson's Pond. Just before you get to Johnson's Pond is a garage where they repair heavy equipment. Next to that is a very nice little house. That was Lily B. Merrill's house. And just for a point of historical information, Lily kept the minutes of the selectmen's and did most of her clerical work in her own house. And then, of course, the town hall was built. And the town hall in those days, early on in the 60s, was where is now the police and the fire station. So not to turn you around geographically, but get in your car and turn around from Johnson's and come back and go straight through, stop at that sign, and then go straight through. And that's a building which was the town hall, which Lily B. Merrill was the town clerk. And the reason I bring her up is that in 1966, now I'll see if I've got the right book, 1966, in 1966, they didn't think to do it, which is really too bad, because they did dedicate, this is the dedication of the 1966 town report to Lily B. Merrill. Now, the reason I say that is, in the 1977, we started to put the town report dedication, and it also included a picture. I don't have that one. I'll have that another day for trivia. I'll have that. And the first dedication was to a gentleman named Mr. Powers, George Powers. He owned a Pontiac dealership down where the on Route, what am I on? Route 138 now. That's where he owned a car dealership. And very nice guy, Mr. Powers. He and his brother Billy were active in the town of Raynham for many years. And I'm not putting Mr. Powers down now. He was the second person asked, and I'll just explain this to you. There was a gentleman on the Board of Assessors, and in those days, well, let me explain coming out of cities. If you come out of cities, you're on my team, right? I came out of a city. And many people in towns think that people in cities think the people in towns are a bunch of hayseeds and all this other stuff. Oh, that's not so. People from cities, I was from the city, we believed we always believed that the towns were operated better than the cities. And the reason we did that was, of course, they were smaller. They were easier to control by a smaller number of people. So I came originally from a city called Woburn, Mass. We don't pronounce the R's, do we? Woburn, Mass. But next to it was a little town which we used to say, now we did show a little disrespect to the towns once in a while. I apologize in advance. We would say the people in the next town was called Burlington. Now, right now, people know the Burlington Mall, don't they? But in those days, it was Burlington and about 25 houses, you know. And we used to say they'll come down to Woburn once a year and look at the two-story buildings. They'll look up at them and see how a two-story building looks like. So that was making fun of them. And to the people of Burlington, if you come from Burlington in advance, I apologize to you and to your immediate members of your family. But we didn't mean disrespect. As a matter of fact, the next town up was Wilmington. Those towns were all part of Woburn originally. Remember now what happens, and this is small town talk, so I'm going to go into small towns. Small towns are the result of, and same thing with Raynham, I said that before. Small towns are the result originally in the colonial days of people walked to church each day. And they just couldn't get it done in the snow, walking from, say, Raynham Center down to Taunton Center. So eventually, these different towns broke themselves off, and Burlington and Wilmington broke off from a town called Woburn. I've said before, in the colonial days, all what you see are cities, which is Boston, of course, is the primary, Lowell, Lawrence, Haverhill. They were all towns also. So we were all town government. But some of these towns, like in Wilmington and Burlington, they were too far away for people to walk down, and that's the reason they broke off. And there was no hard fit. As a matter of fact, one or two of the towns tried to come back afterwards. Things got a little tough, and then they wouldn't let them come back. But it was to their advantage not to come back, I will say that. But having said now that towns are respectful of larger communities now, because remember, we're not breaking off from a city. We're breaking off from a large town, which is the core of that particular area. And what happens in a town like Raynham would have been a farm community, whereas Taunton would have been a manufacturing community. And that's, quite honestly, that's the difference. And that's why when the Leonard family moved, they were rather famous in the town because they were manufacturers in a farm town. And they were very successful. They called the first successful ironworks. I told you a couple of shows ago that the iron works was dedicated with a stone down in what we call the anchor site. Now, if you live in Raynham and you go anywhere outside Raynham, there's 3 to 4 ways you can go, and one of them is the 104 towards Taunton, 44. You got to go by we call the anchor site. That was brought up. It was brought up, paid for to be brought up by George Miller, and it was seen in many photos by Arthur Pillsbury, who was listing himself as a iron worker at that time in the iron works. And the anchor was dropped off at that site. And there is a stone right to the left of it dedicating the first successful ironworks. Now, if somebody comes from Swampscott or one of those towns, they will tell you they had the first ironworks. Well, to have a works is one thing. To have it stay in business is kind of nice. And what happened in many of those towns, they went out of business. Raynham became the first successful ironworks, and it was operated by the Leonard family. The Leonard family, by the way, came from a section in England, and they were very successful in the ironworks in England, came over to the new colony, and they set it up, in this case, in the town of Raynham. So as we get to this first annual town report I'm going to talk about, though, I'm going to talk about the different people who I would consider. This broadcast is primarily, just to give it some substance, from 1950 until 2000. So there's your 50 years. And so I'm a committee of one, and I'm making a decision on different positions that these different people take, because there's nobody here to argue with me. So I'm going to give these certain titles out, and there's no charge for that. And there's no money involved, so if you're related to some of these people, get on with your life. That's all. I'm not going to make a big thing out of it. But it's very nice that they did this, though, and they're very nice people. So the first one I'm going to give in the annual town, and we started then, therefore, to dedicate the town report, and the Board of Selectmen did this, and I said in 1977, George Powers, and I threw in the name Harold Ashley, and then I forgot it. So let me explain to you Harold Ashley. Harold Ashley was one of those old-time Yankees, one of the originals, who was fiery. and he was as honest as the day is long. But you know the kind of person I'm talking about. So we went to Harold, and we said the selectmen went to Harold, and we said we want to dedicate the town report to you, Harold. And at first he said, okay. It was guarded. We caught him off guard. Later he came in and either called us or came into the meeting and said, I don't want that town report dedicated to me. And we said, why not, Harold? He said, and I find myself saying this now, I ain't dead yet, he said. And that was the end of the dedication of Harold Ashley. I must admit that occasionally I have the urge to visit the present selectmen, and they're all friends of mine, and give Harold's name again and check with his lovely daughter, who is in about my vintage, and to try again to get Harold Ashley to name the town report after Harold Ashley. All right, if that's 1977, why am I going up to 1980? And the reason I'm going up to 1980 is that in giving the dedication to the town reports, we had different criteria, but basically it was the person at that time who was either retiring and had put in many years of service, or was just well known, or was dedicated to the town of Raynham, we believe, and had performed actions that were significant to dedicate the town report. But when we did it this time, which I'm sorry they didn't do it for Lily B at the time, what we did with this was we not only dedicated to a person, but we also included a picture, which I think would have been nice of Lily. Lily was a wonderfully attractive lady, and a picture would have been very nice. Some days I think if we can find it again, we should put it in one of the town reports and say this was the original dedication, 1966. But once we did it in 1977, we've done it ever since. So 77, 87, 97, 07. It's been a while since we keep giving it. Now, who am I leading up to? I'm leading up to my vote for the 50, and of course this individual was elected prior to 1950, but he also went into the 1950s and maybe even into the 60s, I believe. And the name of what I would say, and I've casted this vote, Mr. Moderator, that's what we say when we're in a town meeting. Mr. Moderator, cast one vote for a gentleman by the name of, old timers now are guessing at who this is, right? Walter O'Brien. And most of you who are old timers are going to say, yes, that's a good selection. There's the picture of Walter. We got that a little bit, Margot? See Walter O'Brien. Walter O'Brien was, I don't know if he was the first, probably not, because in the early colonial days we had some pretty high elected and appointed positions in the town of Raynham, which the noted historian who does the history someday will put that in writing. This is oral history. Walter O'Brien in the 50-year period was the first, and I venture to guess, and I'll explain it in a minute, the last representative from the town of Raynham. So Walter O'Brien was not only a selectman in the town of Raynham, he had previously been, I believe, on school also, but Walter was a selectman for 21 years, and he was also a representative in Boston, and he represented, which is a very interesting combination, which shows the popularity of Walter. He represented Raynham, he represented Easton, part of Easton, and represented part of Mansfield. So those were the three communities. Now you're saying, well, it's Bridgewater. It's Bridgewater, okay, now. But in those days, in 1980, let me give you the towns again because I know you can keep a secret. This is to yourself now. It's nobody's business but yours. Raynham, part of Easton, and by the way, Easton was where John Ames came. Remember I mentioned John Ames? John Ames came from that part of Easton and was elected and very popular. And Walter was Republican also. And then the other town was Mansfield. Now, I'm going to tell you I'm going to get just a little bit involved in politics, which really You say, well, we shouldn't. Well, that's okay. We're going to do it anyway. Walter was a Republican. John Ames was a Republican. And when Walter ran for office, I don't know whether he followed, probably so, someone in the town who was a very popular Republican, and Republicans were pretty much registered. But now in the town of Raynham, what's the major party in the town of Raynham? There's Democrat, Republican, and Independent, and I'm going to tell you, most of the people, I'm going to use the other word we use, unenrolled. Most of the people in the town of Raynham are unenrolled. When I moved to Raynham in 1961, Catherine and I, Walter O'Brien was the representative. He was a Republican. And you could look it up, and I might even, because, some of the stories I tell are true. The Republicans were probably at least 80%, if not 90% of the people in the town. And the reason they were Republicans was for Walter O'Brien. So that when he went out of town for a vote, if he didn't do well in Mansfield or in Easton, he would overcome it with Raynham votes. So Walter O'Brien was a Republican, and so was, I'll say at least, I'm going to take it to the bank, 80% of the town of Raynham was Republican. We had a little lady from Boston who came out here, Helen Hooley, and they didn't pronounce the H's, right? Different towns, I think we've talked about accents. And she would get up, and if you were a Democrat, you would be very quiet about it. But Helen Hooley would get up and yell out, "Me name is Helen Hooley, and I'm a Democrat." And everybody would stare around because they wanted to see what a Democrat looked like. It was Helen Hooley. She was a Democrat. I went to, and I knew Walter, but not well like other people knew Walter. I knock on the door. And Walter always had a German Shepherd. One of those dogs. It was a hunting dog. So if it isn't German Shepherd, forgive me. Whatever it was a hunting dog because Walter was the instigator of legislation for the red hat for hunters, and he passed that legislation. And the dog would come, and he had screen. There was screen on, and the dog would leap for the screen and try to get at me, and just growling and screaming and all. And Walter would, he would heed whatever Walter said. And Walter said, quiet down. And the dog went, the little dog went. And I went in and I said, Walter, you really have to take the picture of me off the clipboard because I says, your dog's going to hurt himself sometimes jumping at that screen because that's a piece of metal. Otherwise, of course, he would have got me. And Walter said, no, Donald, I have no picture. Why would I have a picture of you? He said, I have no picture of you. He said, I have no picture of anybody on that board. But he said, I do, however, have a dog that will attack if it's not the right person. And so, therefore, I don't have to train that dog not to jump up at you. But he jumps up at everybody. It isn't you particularly. Nice to think you're thinking of yourself, though, that you're important enough for my dog to care about you. Walter O'Brien, one of the great people. And by the way, in the write-up, they did refer to the name Mr. Raynham. And that would be the correct title for Walter O'Brien. And he was a selectman, I'm going to say until, let me see if I've got it here somewhere, 1960-something or other. And from the 40s into the 60s, 21 years, he was a selectman. And he eventually, this is dedicated when he's moving, 1980 he moved down to the Cape. And so that is the story of Walter O'Brien and the dedication of, and I'm going to say now, who am I talking about? I'm talking about the selectmen, aren't I? And I'm saying that Walter O'Brien was my vote for Mr. Raynham, my vote for the #1 selectman in the 1950 to 2000. Walter O'Brien was the man of the year, and he was chairman of the board often. And next show, I also will talk a little bit about Al Porter with them. They jointly went together, and I'll start it off the next show. Total recall now. I'll start off the next show with Albert Porter and Walter O'Brien and anybody else who finished third. Thank you all very much for watching, and don't be a stranger. Say hi.